Hello and welcome to another episode of the Opportunity Podcast. I'm your host, Gregory Elfring, the head of marketing over here at Empire Flippers. And today I am speaking with Landon Greenhalgh, who runs a very cool e-commerce store. We kind of dance around the niche a little bit because we don't want to reveal the niche. But this guy's in the trenches. He's acquired several businesses. And in the past, he acquired B2B companies that had more of an offline presence. And then he moved into acquiring an e-commerce store, and he's doing great. I think this is a really cool business. It's quite a bit unique as far as e-commerce goes because it has a bit of a BDC element, but also a bit of B2B element. And it's just cool talking to a guy that's in the trenches. So with that said, I will say no more and we'll get into the story with Landon. I'll see you guys on the other side. All right, I got Landon Greenhalgh here with me. I met Landon actually over a cold email, and he is running a very cool DDC e-commerce store with a pretty cool story that I wanted to share with the audience. So, before we dive too deep into that, though, Landon, how about you introduce yourself to our audience? Give us the 30-second elevator pitch of who you are.
Yeah, so my name is Landon Greenhalgh, and I'm excited to be here, Greg. I come from Utah, and a little bit about me, I've been in the business world for a while now. I grew up in a pretty entrepreneurial family. So from a young age, I've been around business and have enjoyed learning about business. And just within the last year or so, I acquired my first business in the e-commerce space, and it's growing. Or experiencing some growth, and it's been a lot of fun so far. So that's a little bit about me. I love to, outside of work, I love to be outside and fly fish, run, snow ski, that type of stuff.
Very cool, man. You mentioned this was an acquisition. Did you have other businesses before, or did you jump in just like into the deep water buying a business?
No, so I've been around other businesses for a majority of my career, and then we've done other acquisitions before. And this is the most recent one
Okay.
that we did. And so, yeah, been around acquisitions for a while now, but this is the most recent one.
Very cool. I'm a big fan of acquiring businesses over building them from scratch. So it sounds like you are probably in alignment with me on that. So very
Yeah,
cool.
yeah.
So how about we get into the store itself? Obviously, we'll keep it a bit anonymous, but I think what you're doing is quite interesting. But let's roll back to the actual acquisition here a little bit. So what motivated you to buy a e-commerce store? Have you bought others before? Was this your first one? Tell me a bit about that.
Yeah, so this is the first e-commerce one. We've done other ones in, different industries before, more, distribution, B2B type businesses that didn't really have an online presence. And so, going through that, I saw a lot of the benefits of, distribution and that model. And so I wanted to find a company that I could apply those same principles to that had an e-commerce element to it. And so about a year and a half ago, I started my search for an e-commerce company. Looked at probably thousands of different businesses, and there were a few that were really appealing, and but ultimately decided that this one was the one to pull the trigger on in this space. So it's been exciting, and e-commerce is definitely a different animal, but there's a lot of things that you can do to grow. And the industry is one that's a little bit older and hasn't quite adopted technology, and it's just kind of starting to adopt it. And so there's a lot of growth opportunity in the industry we're in.
Yeah, I like the fact that you said you looked at thousands. So that's one of the things I always tell our buyers, like you should create a criteria that lets you disqualify businesses quickly because it's not about quantity, it's almost more about speed. Like how do I filter these out so I can get closer to the right one? Because there's a lot of businesses out there for sale, but there's very few of them out there that like actually meet what you want, right?
Yeah, yeah, no, that's for sure. And I think that's something that really helped in the search was defining the criteria, and then, being able to make a decision very fast on whether I wanted to learn more about it or move on to the next one. I
I
think a
totally
lot of
forgot
time.
to I totally forgot to
Oh
ask you,
yeah,
but
go
did
ahead.
you do a like an off market kind of deal? Did you source the deal yourself, or were you using brokers, browsing a bunch of marketplaces? What was your strategy for your deal flow?
Yeah, so my strategy had a few different elements to it. Obviously, working with brokers, I've dealt with a lot of brokers over the past few years, and so had relationships with them. And so a lot of the listings, I'd get from brokers. I also did a lot of cold outreach actually, which was actually pretty surprising at the amount of response I got on that. Initially I wasn't sure if I'd get a lot of response, but if someone emails you about buying your business, you're probably going to at least give them 2 seconds of your time to listen. So that
As far
I
as
did
cold
that.
emails go, the offer is pretty good. Like, instead of you pay me money, let me pay you an absurd amount of money instead.
Yeah, exactly. It kind of flips the script a little bit there. So, I did some cold outreach and then also, looked at some off market deals from my network. So, and that's one thing I'd recommend for anybody that's looking for a business is, have multiple different, I guess, points of contact where you can find listings. Because if you're set on one route, sometimes it can take a lot longer to find the right one.
Oh, 100%. Like, as much as I want people to buy through our marketplace, that's another thing I tell buyers. Like, you should look to have multiple channels going at any one time because you don't know where one's going to pop, right? And you should have multiple like deals you're moving ahead because I don't know how many businesses you acquire. It sounds like you acquired a few, so you probably know this, but a general saying in the M&A world is a deal dies 3 times before it actually gets done, right? So like you got to have
Yeah.
multiple things going at once to actually get to the finish line.
Yeah, exactly.
So with your e-commerce store, did you have so you're coming from this, more B2B kind of background and you're moving to e-commerce. Tell me a bit about why you wanted to do e-commerce and a bit about the criteria you had when you before you set off on this journey to buy the store you ended up buying.
Yeah, so e-commerce was really appealing to me for a few reasons. The first reason is it's obviously people are changing the way they buy. We've seen that over the last 15 years even, but even B2B customers are changing the way they buy. And so coming from a more B2B world, I wanted to find a company that had obviously an element of B2C but also B2B customers. And that's what I found with this company was we had a very large B2C client base, but there was a growing portion of our customers that were actually B2B buyers that wanted to purchase through the e-commerce channel. And so, for me, I think that's a good mix to have some B2B customers, some B2C customers. And when I was looking for an e-commerce business, I wanted one that had elements of both just because my skill set is very heavily in the B2B space, but having an element of both, I thought that would be a big benefit. And so far it has been. There's a lot of opportunity to sell to people that used to maybe not buy online just because of how the system worked in the B2B world. And now, people have their phone and they're making purchases for their company. And it's definitely changed the way that businesses buy as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's interesting. Going after e-commerce store has B2B and B2C elements. I mean, almost all of them have B2C elements, but very few have B2B. That does seem like it could be a pretty nice revenue expansion. When you found this business, what was like the makeup? Was it primarily all B2C with like just a tiny bit of B2B, or was it more evenly distributed?
It's pretty evenly distributed. I'd say maybe a
That's
60-40
even better.
split. Yeah, so maybe 60% B2C and then probably 40% B2B. So we're trying to grow both, right? Both revenue streams are very valuable to us. And so, but that's around the split that it was when we purchased the company.
Well, we'll get into how you're growing that. I'm very curious on what you're doing on the marketing front there. But before we get into growing, just a final question on your acquisition. So, when you were starting your search, doing this e-commerce search, what was your process to due diligence? Like, what kind of tips could you give to other buyers that might be listening? And maybe it's their first time because we do attract a lot of like first time buyers who are just learning about this whole entrepreneurship through acquisition. So, maybe you can give us some tips on due diligence, specifically with e-commerce or business in general, whichever way you want to take it.
Yeah. So I think with due diligence, something that really helps, especially for a first time buyer, is just become very acquainted with the information that a business is going to give you, and that can come over time, right? I looked at numerous businesses, and so the more you look at, the more acquainted you're going to be, and the more you're going to know what questions to ask. And so for maybe a first time buyer, I'd recommend just, even if you're not planning on buying right now, start looking at listings, because over time you're going to become a lot more acquainted with financials and the intricacies of companies, and you'll be able to come up with questions really fast to get to that yes or that no. And so when I was looking for this one, due diligence, I think there's a few different components of it. Obviously the financials are a big component of it, making sure that what they say they're doing is actually what they're doing.
That's a big
And
one.
then yeah, and you can find out more on that from bank statements and tax returns, that type of thing. And then another thing is finding out, is their supply, or the manufacturers they're working with, if they're a retailer or a distributor, are those going to still remain after the acquisition? You don't want to go into an acquisition and your supply doesn't want to work with you anymore. Right. Like, you got to make sure that the processes that you have in place and the relationships that you have in place, or that the company has in place, are going to hand over to a new owner pretty seamlessly. And so that's another big component of due diligence, is working with supplier, with the owners, to make sure that the supply is still going to remain. Because if you don't have anything to sell, then you're not going to be in good shape. So, making sure that that is in place. And then also, making sure that every employee that is part of the company, you know, a lot of times in an acquisition, they may not know about it, but making sure that you're not going to lose any key employees along the way.
So you brought up, okay, I know that was supposed to be the last question, but you made me think of a couple more questions here I want to ask on acquisition. So when it comes to the transferability, I'm a big proponent of that too. Like, I see it a lot of the issues crop up in like smaller SaaS businesses, for example, where maybe it's a solopreneur and they have all their recurring payments through like PayPal, and they come to our marketplace like, all right, well, you need to switch them all over to a payment processor that can transfer. They're like, but that means I might lose a bunch of people. Like, yeah, that's what the buyer is worried about too. Because it has
Yeah,
to happen.
yeah,
You have to be able to
exactly.
transfer it, right? So when you
Yeah.
bought this business, and maybe you can also shed light on some of your other acquisitions, but were there any of those kind of relationships with this e-commerce store? And did you do anything with the seller? Like, hey, look, I'll give you this amount up front, but you're going to stay with me for the next, I don't know, 3 months, 6 months, or a year to make sure that these relationships are successfully handed off to me. How did you go about that?
Yeah, no, that's a great point, Greg. In this acquisition, I wanted to make sure that the sellers were available to help with that element. Relationship, transfer of relationships can be difficult, right? Because it can take time to develop relationships. And so, as part of this one, in the contract, I made sure that they'd be around for a period of time after, post acquisition, to aid in that transfer. And it worked out really well. It was, sometimes you get into acquisitions and the seller wants to just wipe their hands
Leave.
and get out.
Retire to college.
And
Yeah.
yeah, they want to get out, and that can be tricky because then it's a much more abrupt transition, and your suppliers and your customers can feel that if it's too abrupt. And so I definitely recommend, if someone's looking to acquire a company, having the sellers be a part of training, or transfer of relationship for a period of time after the acquisition. It doesn't have to be a terribly long amount of time, like 3, 6
Yeah.
months, because a lot of times in an acquisition, you get in and you want to start implementing your ideas and the things that you got your strategy. And so there comes a point where it's good to get the sellers, I don't want to say out of the picture, but there is a point where it doesn't make sense to have them in it anymore.
Oh,
But
absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, but you do want at least a little bit of time.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think a lot of sellers fear that golden handcuff period. Unless your business is like over, typically I see it over a $10 million valuation. Like, the golden handcuffs aren't like that tight. You're like a
Yeah,
pseudo consultant. Maybe the first couple of weeks, yeah, you're working quite a lot with the new owner, but after that, it tends to die down. Where it's like the occasional email or like, hey, could we hop on a call for an hour real quick? I'm just like, am I doing this wrong? Like that kind of stuff from my experience.
exactly.
Is that about the same for you?
Oh yeah, yeah, for sure. It, like you mentioned, some sellers might think that they're locked down for that period of time, but
My
really
life is
it's,
over.
yeah, yeah. There's definitely going to be some element of teaching and transfer of knowledge during that period of time. But after a while, it's just like you said, the occasional call or question that's easily answered. It's not anything crazy.
Okay, so my final acquisition question, unless you accidentally inspire me to ask you another one based on this answer, is what you mentioned about the employees. So I think this is something a lot of buyers don't actually consider. In my experience, and from all the reading I've done on M&A in general, is like buying the business is kind of like the fun part. After you purchase it, it's like, oh no, what have I done? Like the integration part of it, right? That's the real
Yeah.
challenge. Like once the deal is done. So talk to me a bit how you did that with this e-commerce store, your other acquisitions. Like, do you have kind of a game plan of how you alert the employees? Like, how did you go about this basically?
Yeah, so I think it's definitely important that the employees know that the acquisition is going to come. I think for a majority of companies, that there's definitely a balance of telling them too early, but you definitely want to tell them before the acquisition actually happens. Like, hey, this is what's going on. There's going to be a new owner coming in, and so typically that has already taken place before we've even acquired the company. I would recommend that for in most instances, right? Have the sellers work with their employees, let them know like, hey, this is going to happen. That way, when it happens, it's not a big shock, right?
Yeah.
And you can kind of catch it in stride. And that's what we've tried to do is really get into the company and already be in stride, not have a lot. Obviously, you're going to have to learn how people work and what works best for the people that you have, but try and make it so it's not a shock right when you move in.
Right. Yeah. A deer in the headlights moment. Like, do I even
Hmm.
have a job after this, after today?
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah,
think
yeah.
that,
Sure.
yeah, yeah.
I think, yeah, it's important to assure the employees, like, hey, you've been a part of the growth of this company, and we want to continue to help you grow in your role, and make it known, like, hey, we're not coming in and cleaning house, right? And some people have that goal, but for me, it's like the employees are what make a company great, and so going in and just assuring them, like, hey, it's going to be okay, and working with them to grow in the company.
Yeah, I think that's probably, I mean, not always, but I would say that's probably the number one fear that employees have in a takeover, especially if it's a private equity buy, because it's like, oh no, because those guys need to
Yeah,
make their profit back like quite quick, right? And within like five
yeah,
to 10 years on their funds usually. So usually doesn't bode well for short term.
yes, for sure.
But yeah, I think like I don't know. Me personally, when it sounds like you're a pretty cool dude. Like when you acquire the business, like if an employee like the fear part is gone, they might get rekindled and get excited again. Like, oh my god, this is like the new chapter. I get to grow the business with this guy. Have you found that with some of your employees?
Yeah, for sure. I think you can make or break an acquisition by how you treat the employees, right? If you come in and it's my way or the highway type mentality, it can really ruin a lot of what made that company great. And so coming in, and I think humility is one of those things that's very important. Coming in, recognizing that the employees probably know way more about the company than you do, right? And using that to the advantage of the company, working on coaching the employees up rather than out, and just being humble and teachable, I think shows a lot. If you come in as a new owner and an employee feels like they can teach you about the business, it can really excite them and make, maybe rekindle a desire to work hard. And so I think that's a very important aspect of an acquisition.
Oh man, I absolutely agree. There's nothing funnier than the new owner coming in like, "Hello, I'm the new boss. Can you teach me what I'm supposed to do?"
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
it builds some camaraderie, right? I can never pronounce
yeah,
that
oh
word,
yeah,
but yeah, I agree, man. I think having employees have a lot of autonomy is almost the most important thing. Like, there's obviously they want to get paid well, all that kind of stuff, but that's almost like a hygiene versus like if you give them real agency where they're teaching you, showing you what's up. Like, I think that's cool and helps inspire people. So we were just talking about how important people are to grow. So let's move into talking about how you've actually started growing this acquisition now. So you did your due diligence, you got your negotiations, you got it done, your post integration with these new employees. So how did you, like, maybe this is a little bit before the acquisition, but maybe a little bit after too, as you had these insights, like what were some of the growth opportunities you saw here and how did you kind of see yourself capitalizing on these growth opportunities with the business?
yeah. So I think that you made an important point. I think the strategy for growth, it definitely comes before you close on the company. A big portion of it is identifying, okay, what can we do to this business to take it to the next level? And so when I found this business, it was okay, what are the opportunities for growth that we have? And then, identifying those. And then once we get into the company, obviously continuing to adapt. But something that's really helped in our growth is just adding and working with different suppliers. The previous owners of the company, they lived internationally. And so as a result, a lot of suppliers wouldn't take them on as, as a supplier, a dealer.
Mm.
And so that was one thing I identified right out the gate was, hey, let's go work with these manufacturers that previously, they weren't able to work with, just due to location. And that has been pretty beneficial to open these new relationships up and be able to offer different products and that type of thing to our customer base. And so that was one big thing was, hey, let's improve our supplier base. The next one is obviously on the web marketing side of things. There were some processes and strategies that I saw some opportunity to tweak a few things and grow. And so, I think for someone specifically looking at an e-commerce business, it's important to look at the metrics. Okay, like this is where we're at going into the acquisition. Where do we want to be, in 6 months, a year, 2 years, that type of thing. So, working on that as well.
With the suppliers, that's super interesting to me. I didn't think about that. So I'm assuming they couldn't work with the previous owner just because like their company doesn't operate in that country. But wasn't he like, and maybe I'm wrong, but I was underneath the impression most of the customers before the acquisition were still in America, right?
Yes, that is correct. But the reason that a lot of these suppliers wouldn't work with the previous owners is because they were an international company. They weren't an American based company. And so, that was a big opportunity for us to come in and say, okay, here are, we're based in America. And it opened up a lot of doors really fast. And so that's really helped us a lot.
Yeah, so now I think now is a good time to ask some of the questions about how the business model works. So one of the things I really liked about your e-commerce store when I looked at it is like you sell some pretty high-end stuff, like high ticket stuff. And me as a marketer selling $1 million businesses, I kind of have a love in my heart when I see another guy trying to like sell something big on the internet that normally like you have an in-person conversation with like back in the day to buy one of these things, right? So how does your business model work? Are you doing a kind of like a drop shipping model with the suppliers, or is it some kind of other kind of system you have set up here?
Yeah, so we do a lot of that. We do a lot of drop shipping. If we need to, we'll bring in inventory as well. So it's a good mix of drop shipping and just shipping from our warehouses.
Are you using like you're buying some inventory and then when people are going throughout the checkout process, they might get like some upsells, downsells, or cross sells with like drop ship products as well? Is that kind of how the funnel works?
So we haven't done a lot of that yet. That's something that
Mm,
we'd
you
like to
should.
get
You'd make
to in the
potentially
future.
a lot more
Yes, for
money.
sure. Yeah, no. So we definitely want to get that implemented. But yeah, a lot of the time, and you made an interesting point. This industry back in the day, it was one that people would not buy online, right? The product types. It was, hey, I want to go. I want to talk to someone in person. I
I want to
need to.
see it in person,
I want to
Yeah,
see it. I
for
want to hold
sure.
it. Whatever. And people are changing the way they buy, and so now you're looking in different ways and doing their research in different ways.
Absolutely. I think it's a cool model. That's super interesting about the American suppliers. What a handicap that guy had that you were able to take advantage of. It's really cool. In terms of what you have implemented for growth so far, is there any like particular strategy? I know you said web marketing was a big one for you, but could you go into detail like of one or two things that has really helped you guys in terms of growing the brand?
Yeah. So one thing for sure, with the suppliers is a lot of these suppliers have really big customer bases. And so on the web marketing side of things, we've been able to grow the brand, even just becoming a supplier for them, advertising that we are an authorized dealer of, said manufacturer. That's brought a lot of brand awareness to the company. And so that's been a big deal for us so far.
In terms of, I know you mentioned your B2B stuff. So do you have a sales team that's helping on that, or is it just purely all e commerce? You do.
No, yeah, we've got a sales team. Yeah, we get a lot of phone calls, and so we've got a sales team that deals with a lot of the inbound that we get.
Is the sales team involved on like the B2C side too? Or is it more do it yourself kind of scenario?
We have both, yeah, because we have B2C customers that call, and have questions and stuff. And so our sales teams work with both to help get them the answers that they need.
I'm assuming you inherited the sales team through the acquisition.
Hmm.
How
Yep.
was that? I know managing sales teams is a special talent in of itself.
Yeah, luckily it's been good so far. The previous owners did a great job of, honing in their sales process. And so far it's been actually pretty painless.
Oh, that's great. That's usually
Yeah.
not what I hear.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's been good so far.
That's very good. I'd imagine your previous experience in B2B has probably helped you a little bit, almost like trained you like what to expect. 'Cause I'm assuming you had sales guys in those businesses as well.
Yes. Yep.
Very good. So another question I have for you for growth in general, maybe it doesn't apply as much to your business, but typically with e-commerce stores, when they're growing, they need to order a lot more inventory to meet up with the demand, which then requires more marketing. And it's like this big, can be sometimes a very vicious hamster wheel, right? So a
Hmm.
lot of what they do, they'll go and secure like additional funding to, buy that inventory or the growth liquidity they need for the ads, whatever. Have you run into any of those kind of bottlenecks yourself?
We haven't yet. I'm sure in the future we'll probably see some of those constraints, but right now, luckily we haven't run into any major bottlenecks on that front. With this industry, I know it's bound to come at some point during the growth, but
The phantom is looming in the future, Landon.
yeah,
I am
yeah,
approaching.
yeah, exactly. So we're aware of it, but so far, luckily, we haven't.
And in terms of your main traffic channels, are you gunning after like SEO? Are you doing paid media with this? Like, what's kind of the channels you're exploiting right now?
Yeah, so it's a pretty healthy mix between paid and, SEO and direct traffic. So, right now it's pretty spread across the board. We're trying to improve on each aspect of that. And so each one plays a critical part for us, but right now it's pretty evenly spread in terms of traffic.
That's great. Yeah, I feel like your products would make a great SEO play, make a pretty interesting media play if you're making that work, which I assume you must be. Like, I just think it's fascinating selling a high tech item through ads. I'm actually going to be starting not my first, but my first real demand gen campaign for Empire Flippers to get more and more businesses and sell more businesses through a demand play. So I'm curious how that will go. I'll let you know.
Yeah,
Hopefully
yeah, for
good.
sure.
Hopefully as good as yours. When it comes to your marketing and I guess your growth efforts in general, do you have like some KPIs you're constantly monitoring, like ROAS or something else? Like what kind of KPIs are you shooting for?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. The ROAS we're looking at, all the time. And then just the main channels that we're receiving the most traffic from. And then, another big one, 'cause like I said, we get a lot of people that call in. And so just attribution, where are those customers that are calling from coming from? And so using our phone system with our analytics platform to track that as well. And then also, another big one is the cost of advertising, CPC, and those are a couple of the main big ones that we look at.
For your attribution, are you using anything special, like any kind of software or custom solution, or just kind of going off of what Facebook is telling you or what the network's telling you?
Yeah, that's something that we're trying to improve on right now is, linking our analytics with the phone system. Right now, it's pretty, I guess, basic in terms of how we're tracking it. We just get a lot of customer feedback on the phone side of things, but then we're able to use our analytics platform to check, where a lot of those callers are coming from. So, yeah.
I don't know if it would work for you. It ended up not working for me. When people buy your products, are they usually paying like with credit card, like they're a payment processor? I know you have some higher end products, or maybe they're paying in a different way.
Yeah, yeah. So we primarily, through a processor, and then, sometimes we'll do payment through, bank transfer and that type of
Gotcha.
thing.
Yeah,
But
that's what
yeah,
screwed me on all the attribution software was Bankwire. So the tool I was
yeah.
going to tell you to check out, it's been around for a while. It's pretty cool. It's called Wicked Reports, and like they're
Okay.
using payment processors and stuff. Like it's very cool. It's very slick. But we got to the part of my onboarding, like, okay, what's your payment processor? Like Bankwire. Like, oh, haha. Like, what do you use Stripe? Like, no, Bankwire. Like when people buy
Yeah,
$1 million business, studying Bankwire, it's like, oh, well, this is probably not going to help you then because we have no way to help
yeah,
you on this. So I feel
yeah,
you on the attribution pay.
yeah, for sure.
When it comes to your business scaling and like scaling the business also increases the workload, right? And it sounds like you have other businesses you got going on, you have other interests, you got fly fishing along with the acquisitions to do, right? So as a entrepreneur, as you're growing this stuff, like how are you kind of managing your time? What's your personal productivity system?
Yeah, so I think it's something that's really helped me is just weekly planning, right? Planning out the week and blocking out my time, making sure I'm very specific and intentional on the time I use. I think, talking about work and then hobbies and family and stuff, being intentional wherever I'm at, right? So if I'm at work, being intentional with my time and in my weekly planning, planning out each day and what I want to accomplish. I served a church mission a while ago, 10 plus years ago in Taiwan, and planning was a very big part of that, planning what we were going to do each day. And that's something that stuck with me is just being very specific and intentional with my time. And so every Sunday I look at the week and what I've got and set goals. And then, obviously stuff comes up, you can't change that, but just trying to be intentional where I'm at.
I assume the mission was with LDS, just stereotype because you're in Utah,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I, I
Exactly.
I actually grew up LDS as well. I never went on a mission though. I did go on. Well, I guess I went on. Wasn't a church sponsored mission. I did go hitchhiking when I was like 19 for fun across the west coast of America for like I think it was 56 days. I watched the movie Into the Wild. Very famous,
Okay.
loved slash hated guy. If you're from Alaska, is the guy from Into the Wild. I loved him, so he inspired me to do something similar. But yeah, that's cool. You made it out to Taiwan. If you ever come over to Vietnam, let me know. We'll go have a cafe soda, which will give you a heart attack. It's the strongest coffee in Vietnam. Cool. I like the time blocking thing. I like being intentional. When it comes to your suppliers, I'm curious. So 2020 and 2021 was a pretty touch and go scenario. Like it was a very profitable scenario for a lot of e-commerce store owners, but it's very touch and go when it comes to supplier side. Now you mentioned you being in the USA now is open up all these other suppliers coming in. And with what you sell, I would imagine a lot of them are actually being manufactured in America. So walk me through a bit of your supply chain. Like, is it being disrupted right now or is it pretty solid? Like, tell me how that looks.
Yeah, I think most industries saw during, the COVID years saw a disruption to some extent, right? Being a made in America company, you still have some suppliers that are getting components from overseas. They manufacture a lot of their products here in the US, but even things like steel, right? Like maybe the steel comes from overseas or something
Yeah.
like that. That can oftentimes disrupt that. And so I think every industry at some point had a little bit of disruption during that time, but right now we're in a pretty good spot. Thankfully, the supply chain has been very good, and so yeah, it's currently two thumbs up.
Good, good. Yeah, I had
Yeah.
a lot of customers, man. Like one of the things buyers look for, and I'm sure you did too in your acquisition search, is like, all right, do you have one supplier? Is there only one manufacturer? Like that's a red flag, right? Like anything could happen to this guy. And so I used to have customers like this is 2019, like, oh yeah, we're very well diversified. We have like 6 factories in China. Then COVID comes around, like, oh, it turns out everyone leaves from the Shanghai port and no one can leave. So
Yeah.
like the 6 factories now become zero, right? So I
Yeah.
have seen a lot of people diversify. Vietnam has seen some of it. Mexico is doing some surprisingly interesting stuff with their manufacturing, and a lot of people reshoring. So that's cool to
Yeah.
hear that you haven't been affected too deeply, and things seem to be going well. For your higher
Yeah.
ticket products, you said you do keep some inventory. So for your higher ticket products, are you storing those in like your own warehouse kind of setup and you ship them
Hmm.
out, or how does that go?
Yep. Yep. Exactly.
Interesting. And how do you forecast like, okay, I think we're gonna do this many sales, so I need to get, this many new of this big thing into my warehouse. Like, how do you go about managing your supply chain forecasting?
Yeah, so it's, over time we've been able to gather a lot of data on that and be able to forecast the amount of units that we, typically need to have in stock. And so sometimes obviously we're for the items that we bring in, where the forecasting can be, up and down, but just basing it off, data that we've calculated over time.
Yeah, I feel like supply chain forecasting is a bit like throwing like the bones of fate. Like this might be right.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
feel you on that. What kind of sell cycle do you guys have? Is it? It must be above 30 days for some of your products, I would assume.
Yeah, sometimes it can be, a little bit longer. Sometimes it's quicker. I'd say on the higher ticket ones, it definitely is a little bit longer.
Are you hitting those customers in multiple ways during that whole process?
Yeah, yep. So we have, we're doing email outreach and different advertising and stuff like that. And then, for the B2B side of things, sometimes you get customers that it has to go through approval processes. And so your hands are a little bit tied on those, but just consistently following up through not only technology but also human contact. That's something that we utilize our sales teams for, is just following up with leads that way as well.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. So for us, I'm not doing it right now, but I'm planning on it. We've done it in the past, but like, buying a business and selling a business, this represents for most sellers like 80% of their net worth, right? Or 90% a lot of the time. So a lot of trust goes into it. So the other funny thing I had it with Wicked Reports, like, oh, what's your sales cycle? Like, 256 days. They're like, what? Like longer than most things even track, right?
Oh yeah, yeah.
All right, I feel your pain on that front too. With your new lens into the e-commerce world and your previous B2B experience, what do you think the future of e-commerce looks like for yourself or just in general?
Yeah, I think, e-commerce is definitely changing. I think, as mentioned before, the types of things people are going to be buying online is changing. I mean, now people can buy cars online and they don't even bat an eye, right? So it's like,
Right.
not only I think the amount of money that's going to be spent online is going to keep going up, and then also I think obviously AI and technology is just going to continue to evolve to the point where, you know obviously AI is smarter than a lot of what we can do, and so I think that'll be a big play. There's going to be a lot more tools for e-commerce owners, whether it be to logistics or warehousing or inventory or whatever. I think there's going to be a lot more tools, in the tech stack that we can utilize to grow the business.
Oh man, it's such a good time in my view to be an e-commerce entrepreneur. Like I have a bunch of friends right now. They're going deep into building their own AI businesses, which it's cool. But I told them like
Hmm.
you shouldn't be doing that. You should be building an e-commerce store using AI because the AI stuff is
Yes.
all going to be obsolete in months. And of course, no
Yep.
one listens to the business broker. But one of my friends, he built up a chatbot business with like 20K a month, and now it's completely gone because OpenAI came out with their own chatbots, right? And I told you, like
Yeah.
but yeah, if you're an e-commerce store owner, I 100% agree with you. Like, there's so many cool tools. Like, I don't know if you use this yet. It's not necessarily AI, but it's blowing up a lot on my feed. Like the TikTok shop for e-commerce store
Hmm.
owners. Have you done anything with
Yeah.
this yet?
We haven't done a ton with it, but it's definitely, social is something that we want to expound on for sure, and something we're very aware of.
Like, I don't want to reveal your niche, but I feel like with your niche, you could hire like some comedian to do a bunch of crazy stuff. It would
Yeah.
blow up on TikTok.
Oh yeah.
Let me know if
Yeah.
that works. I'll invoice you
Okay.
my $30 consulting fee.
There you go.
But yeah, you should definitely try it. I have a buddy. He was building an e-commerce store, but then he got sucked back into crypto land. So his ambitions have changed. But he was doing like decently well and like not that much effort with his TikTok shop. So yeah, like just more to your point, like it's a very exciting future for e-commerce in my view. Before we go into the rapid fire questions, do you have any like last advice you give to anyone out there seeking to acquire an e-commerce store? Like anything in particular you'd really want to point out?
Yeah, I think, it's just figure out what you want, define your criteria, and then dive in. Don't wait for the perfect time or the perfect opportunity to come along to get started, because you're missing out on a lot of learning, and not just learning but networking opportunities as well. And so really define your criteria and then get in and start looking.
I'm so glad you said that again because I just wrote a automated email about defining criteria that's going into our buyer funnel. Like, yes, yes, I'm in agreement. Well, great, man. Are you ready for the rapid fire section?
Yeah, let's go.
All right, let's go. The final question is the hardest question, and fortunately, if you don't answer it well, I won't be publishing this podcast. So no pressure at all. Do your best.
Okay, no pressure.
All right. The first question I have for you, Landon, is in your view, what is the best hidden growth opportunities within e-commerce right now?
Yeah, I think the best opportunities are in the niches where people are starting to change the way they buy. They're not, they don't have to buy in person. It's going after maybe more of those high ticket items.
Yeah, I 100% agree. What tools or resources would you recommend for people to use to grow their e-commerce stores?
Definitely analytics platforms. I think each e-commerce business has different needs, and so defining which platform is going to be the best for you, but using analytics to drive the decision making, I think, is really important.
100%. All right, this is the hard question, Landon. Everything's leading up to this moment. So, in your illustrious career, what has been your funniest moment working in the acquisition space and as an e-commerce store owner?
Yeah, so I know this answer right off the bat. You know, I'm not looking when I was looking for a business, it wasn't, I'm not looking for $1 billion a year business, right? I'm definitely lower on the totem pole than that, but I knocked myself into a few doors that, talking to people that were running 500, $1 million a year companies and that type of thing, and felt pretty funny, but that's how it goes. Sometimes it's hard to tell how big some companies are. And so there were a few times where I'd reached out, just cold contacted some business owners and come to find out they were way over what I was looking for. And, I thought that was pretty funny, but
I have ran into that as well with
yeah,
people.
not
So, yeah.
nonchalantly just saying, "Hey, okay, yeah, no, thanks for the reply," and then walking away with your tail between your legs. But
Elon's responding back to you, Landon, like, tell me more, Landon,
yeah,
about you buying Tesla. Like, I'm interested.
exactly, yeah,
That's my
exactly.
you got a few billion. Yeah,
Yeah,
with my little cold email campaign, which is how you and I met. One thing I think is quite funny is a lot of the tools that aggregate the data are a bit out of date, right? And
yeah,
I love entrepreneurs because they always have a little bit of the fight in them, right? I like, oh, I see you're doing this much. I get so many responses where like, no, I am doing way more than that. You need
yeah,
like, okay,
yeah,
great. That's even
yeah.
better for what I'm like telling you about.
Exactly.
So that's great. Well, you passed the final question with flying colors, my friend. So we'll publish the podcast, and we'll help
Good
you
deal.
find your next $30 million acquisition, whether you want it or not.
Okay, sounds good.
If anyone wanted to connect with you and kind of pick your brain and connect further on with what you're doing, where's a good place for someone to hit you up?
Yeah, so LinkedIn, you can find me on LinkedIn. That's probably the best place. Just Landon Greenhalgh.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll put the link in the show notes. And thanks for doing this, man. I'm hoping to change that in 2024, but it's really nice talking to someone who's like in the trenches, like actually doing this stuff. I often talk with like a lot of vendors and stuff, but this is a real story. I think you have a really cool business. So anyone in my audience that wants to connect with Landon, definitely go spam his LinkedIn.
Sounds good. Okay, thanks, Greg. Appreciate it.
Pleasure. There you have it. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it got you inspired at all the different things that are happening in this industry. And of course, if you just want to buy a highly profitable business, you can always go to empireflippers.com/marketplace, or maybe you want to make an exit of your highly profitable business, and you could go to empireflippers.com/sell your site. I've been your host, Greg. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you leave a review, give us a like, a follow, share it across social media. Talk to you all soon. See you on the next episode.